I first met him back in 1958. I was a volunteer for the Youth March for Integrated Schools. And of course, Paul was already there. As Newfield told you, he and Paul had met Mike Harrington several months before I did. And they were converted to Democratic Socialism. And after meeting Mike, Paul became a YPSL, which was the youth organization of the Socialist Party. Now, I have to admit that I didn't join the YPSL. I might have, but other members kept insisting that Paul was an exception, not at all like them. See, with all respect to former YPSLs who are here, the YPSLs were decadent. Oh, the horrified mothers told of children who had read the biography of Trotsky in a village coffee shop and were turned into YPSLs. YPSLs were creatures of Union Square bars. They were never seen in daylight. They had bad skin. Now, there's a difference between those years and now. Back in the 1950s, people who were decadent and knew it were a little bit self-conscious and apologetic. Not like today when decadent people think they're better than you are and go out in the halls and laughing. The YPSLs would say to me, "Have you met our new member, Paul DuBrul? He's not like us. He's so normal. He has a friend, Newfield, who's also normal. If you would join the YPSL, we'd have two normal people in you. Then we could recruit anybody." Well, in later years, the decadent YPSLs either vanished or went to work for George Meany, and what was left became the DSA, and I did join about 24 years after Paul did. But think of the money I saved. After college, Paul went to work for the National Student Association. Now, NSA wasn't activist. It was middle of the road, but it was very important. Almost every college in America belonged to it. And the strategy that many of us had for building a progressive student movement, an activist student movement, included having a highly visible liberal presence at the annual NSA convention, which thousands attended. When I went in 1962, I found that DuBrul had already been there. In fact, he had been chair of the first Liberal Caucus in 1960. Later, his job with NSA was to organize support for the civil rights sit-ins. Now, about that time, I joined Students for a Democratic Society, thinking I was one of the first members, but DuBrul was already there. And he had the good sense to stay in the organization when it was under attack, and later he had the good sense to quit before the whole thing became overripe. After his work with NSA, Paul became a trade unionist, research director of the Furniture Workers Union and editor of its newspaper. My sister Joan visited him in the office and reported back with wonder that he used pencils without erasers. Now, in journalism, that's like a bike without brakes. But for Paul, it was a matter of pride. In 1961, too, we had a student organization in New York. We called it the Franklin Roosevelt Club. Now, of course, today we wouldn't call it that. We'd call it the Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt Club. Paul was already an elder figure. He wasn't really older, but he had a real job, so he seemed older. And we would often invite him to speak, and he told us that young people should join the labor movement. And for many, that wasn't a natural conclusion. The growing student organizations were going in the opposite direction, but Paul was right. I'm probably the only person in this room who was asked in 1962, would you want your sister Joan to marry Paul DuBrul? That wasn't Paul who asked. But I inquired of my sister, "You really like this guy?" And she said, "Sure. Paul was the only one of your friends who hasn't named his cat Che Guevara." About that time, Paul decided to destroy the Tammany machine on the Lower East Side. By the time I got down there, he was already vice president of the Rutgers Reform Club and on the executive committee of the forerunner of the New Democratic Coalition. Victories were slow in coming, but they did come. And much later, in 1968, when Bella Abzug won her first primary, we saw how the groundwork of reform organizing that Paul had helped to lay years before had paved the way for that victory. Now, by then, Paul was long gone from the East Side. He had moved to Washington to write speeches for Ruther at the AFL-CIO. Then, as now, for Paul, speechwriting means inserting clarity and anti-corporate populism into the remarks of people who often wouldn't have been known for clarity and anti-corporate populism. The list is long, but best left unread. But when you're done talking to Paul, you think that his ideas are your ideas anyway. In fact, I was once convinced that one of Paul's ideas was mine. In 1973, I was sitting in Riverside Park with my wife, Lynn, not married yet, and along came Paul. And he said, "Do you know that they want to put an interstate highway through here and destroy the park?" Well, we hadn't known. And he said, "Franz Leichter is having a meeting about it. Maybe you should go." And we went. Meanwhile, that was when Paul was working for Bob Abrams. He was writing the first major policy paper attacking the plan that was to become known as Westway. The next week, Paul came and he said, "We need a button, and the button should read, 'No highway, no way, and I'll pay for it,'" he said. Now, you see, he knew that if you start with a button, then an organization is sure to follow. And he was right. As a result, Lynn and I spent the next 10 years as the co-chairs of the Coalition Against Westway. And early in that fight, we met Ruth Messenger, and needless to say, Paul was sitting next to her at the time. Now, I don't know how he does it. You see, it's the art of pre-arrival. But it's one of the most subtle and most effective forms of political leadership that I've ever seen.